As Scott said, my chapter was on calm, but I thought tonight I would talk to you about finding my voice. I'm going to go back to when I was 13 years old. I'm standing in my childhood bedroom, looking in the mirror, feeling ugly. My red hair, freckles, glasses, overbite. I just stood there looking at my reflection and not liking what I'd see. I raised my hand and put it into the right-hand corner of my mirror, and it splintered down the side, and I just stood there in tears, looking in the mirror, saying, no one will love me, and praying to God that maybe someday I would be a wife and mother. On September 6, 1980, I was married to a wonderful man named Cliff, and we started our life together. And we would have 2 children. And I took my role as wife and mother very seriously. I had a job outside of our home to help provide for our family, but it was wife and mother that was important to me. For 18 years, we had a wonderful life. I was so happy. Our family was flourishing. Our daughter is 5, and my son's 12 at this time. And in September 1998, my husband and I sat in a neurologist's office in Kingston. My hand on his, and the neurologist gave us the news that he had ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease. I squeezed his hand so tight and tried to keep it together. I had an inkling that that was the diagnosis, being a medical secretary, and some of his symptoms up till that point. We didn't hear anything beyond, you have ALS. The neurologist, I remember, we stood up, he handed us a pamphlet and said, get your affairs in order. And it was just, I didn't even know what ALS was, to tell you the truth. I had given a donation now and then outside of the beer store, but I didn't understand what ALS was. It was our anniversary week that we got the diagnosis. And we had gone to Ottawa for the weekend, the 2 of us, and we laid in bed holding each other that first week and just discussing, like, how are we going to manage, get through this? How are we going to tell the kids? What's it going to look like? I made so many promises that day. Don't worry, they'll find a cure. We'll do fundraising. We'll do what we can. Don't worry, you'll die at home. We'll get through this. Little did I know how much it would take from our lives. ALS moved in, and it was very painful. My husband needed total care within 2 years, and I worked full time, raised the kids. In August 2002, we were a family in crisis. Everybody was exhausted. My husband was dealing with his changes in his disease. He was angry. He would lash out. The kids, well, we all actually, the kids and I had found our corner of the house. Each had a little corner where we could sort of disappear when things got a little rough. And I can remember on this day, I think my daughter was trying to ask her dad to get a cat. And there was this big argument over her wanting a cat. And to me, it was, sure, give her a cat. We're going through so much, she needs something. And I noticed her in the corner of my eye, the stairs to the basement to the right, and she was sort of cowering in the corner. And she's like 8 years old at this point. And in that moment, I realized this wasn't just about my husband and I going through ALS, it was our children as well. And there were some decisions I would have to make. So I decided that it was time, this was 4 years into Cliff's diagnosis, that I needed respite and the kids needed respite. So I made arrangements for him to go to St. Mary's of the Lake for a 2-week respite to give us a break. And I was going to take the kids to a cottage where we had gone every summer since Shannon was about 4. And this would be the first summer that Cliff wouldn't be going with us. And I can remember driving the wheelchair van to St. Mary's, taking him up to the floor where he would be staying for 2 weeks, dropping him off, giving the nurses the rundown on his routine, how I did things at home. And he didn't have any mobility at that point. And his speech was not that great either, actually. And I handed her a box of cards, which I had numbered from 1 to 14 because he would be there for 14 days. And in that, each card I had written how much we would miss him and just that we loved him, because I didn't want him to feel abandoned as we went off to the lake. And it was the hardest thing to turn around and leave him there. So I found myself at the lake with the kids, and I sat in an Adirondack chair that day or that week with a box of self-help books, looking blankly out into the lake, wondering, where's Donna? I don't know who Donna is. I knew all my roles in life. I was a caregiver. I was an employee. I was a wife. I was a mother. I was the taxi driver. I was the caregiver. I was the nurse. I was the social worker. Thankfully, the family didn't fall apart all at once. The kids seemed to have their times separately. But I had forgotten to put myself on the list. I realized I had caregiver burnout. I had warnings about it along the way, but you ignore it. I had so many other things to juggle. I wasn't worrying about myself. So I sat at the lake that day or that week and realized, well, actually I wrote 10 letters to people in my life, coworkers, parents, siblings, asking them who they saw when they saw Donna, because I didn't know who I was. I didn't know what made me happy. I was just empty. I was a shell. And my mom sent my one sister up with my letter because they were there at a different cottage and said, what do you want me to say? And at that point, I realized nobody could tell me who Donna is. I had to find Donna. So the journey began to find Donna. We were at the cottage for a week, and then I had another week back to work, but my husband was to come back home at 2 weeks. And I couldn't bring him home because my body would shake. I didn't have it. I couldn't be a caregiver anymore. So I had to tell him that he couldn't come home, that he would be there. And I was breaking a promise. He would not die at home. That was one of the hardest promises I had to break. And he was angry. It took about 2 months for him to settle in. And I would go visit, and he'd turn his wheelchair around and put his back towards me. And then I would go on home, and he would still, he was at St. Mary's from Monday to Friday. I would bring him home Friday night to Sunday because it was so important to me to keep my family together. We didn't have a quantity of time, but we certainly had quality. And it was about a year when he was at St. Mary's. And I had to make the decision to sell our home. It was the home that my husband had built, and we had moved into in August, 1 month before his diagnosis. The house he built, it was our dream forever home. I had to sell the house to move in town because I was just on the road all the time, working full time, getting the kids to their activities, and then going to St. Mary's to help feed him and just do what I needed to do in the activities that he needed. And on weekends, I needed to be closer. So I bought a house in town, and life was going along pretty well. We had a new routine. He had settled in. And then this one weekend, Cliff was home. It was in an intimate moment between the two of us, and I saw these pleading eyes, except they weren't the pleading eyes of my husband. They were the pleading eyes of my abuser as a child. They were my dad's eyes. In that split second, my past collided with my present. I made my way downstairs and to the laundry room and turned on the dryer. That was my place to go. I'd sit on the floor with the dryer on and the noise so I could cry and nobody would know. And thankfully, I was in therapy at that time because I was trying to manage the emotions and the reality that Cliff was going to die. And I could make sense of that. He had ALS. Nobody survives ALS. And the life expectancy is 3 to 5 years. And we were already into 5 years. And so along with the therapy, I decided to write a letter to my dad. So I had the courage to go to their house on this one day and sit in their family room. And my dad was on the left in his chair. My mom was over on the right. I sat, here I am in my early 40s, reading this letter. My hands were shaking, the tears were flowing, my eyes were stinging, my heart was pounding out of my chest. And I read this letter to him and just saying exactly what I felt. And I was taking my voice back. I was taking my life back. I finished my letter. I looked over to my dad and he blamed my mom. I looked over at my mom and she said, "Don't tell your brothers." So she made it another secret. I didn't have to worry about my sisters because they were abused too. I got up and left and shut the door and stood on their front porch, not crying tears of pain. I was celebrating that I had just taken my life back. I was so empowered. I would have screamed from the rooftop at that time. I was no longer going to be a prisoner to my fear. Now I understand why at 13 I stood and shattered the glass, the mirror. It was now time to put the pieces back together. It was hard work, far harder than watching my husband die. On November 13th, 2004, my husband passed away. I was by his side till his last breath, and he died on his own terms. Nothing unsaid between us. I could understand the grief and loss of losing him. The hard work now is trying to heal the young girl inside me and integrate her into the woman I am. And through journaling and therapy, I've been able to find my voice and be confident within myself. And both my parents died 5 years ago, 4 months apart from each other. And I had made peace and had forgiven them, not for what had happened, but because I needed to forgive to move forward. And I didn't know their story. I don't know why they did what they did. And my mom was probably abused as well. And I'm so happy that I've broken the chain of abuse because I stood up and said no more. And my hopes are that my children have seen the pain and what we had gone through, but I want to make a good life. And I did the work. I had a choice. I could have not dealt with the past and buried it, but then the kids and myself, I wouldn't be true to who I am. And I can sit here today and I'm so proud to be part of Daring to Share because I feel I'm healed. I'm 61 years old. I retired 2 years ago. I love my life. My children are now married. I have a grandson. I get to choose to do things that bring me joy. I will always, a piece of me will always be of service to those who are struggling because I don't want anyone to feel that lost and alone. And I'm just proud of myself for committing to my truth and to my voice. And my voice isn't loud, I'm quiet. But the most important voice is the one inside, the one I now listen to, the one I find guidance from. And I'd like to thank all of you for sharing our stories and being part of Daring to Share tonight. And I'm just so grateful that you all are now a part of my story as I move forward in my life. Thank you so much.